And when he arrived on campus here, his star was already shining quite bright in design-based implementation research. He is incredibly prolific, and I don't know how many projects he's involved with, but he seems to be involved in far more than, I think I'm busy, but then I look at Bill and I said, I'm not busy enough. So, but he is so involved with the community of educators and designers and policymakers. It's amazingly impressive. And the substance of the work that he does really is fascinating, and he forges into new areas. And one of those areas he will talk about tonight. We are pleased to have him to be our opening plenary speaker. And well, without further ado, Bill Penuel.
Thank you, David, for the wonderful introduction. So in some ways, your Thursday speaker, Danny Edelson, raised the question that I'm going to try to answer today for design-based implementation research. When he wrote a paper in 2002 called "What Do We Learn When We Design?" So one way I hope that you will listen is, what do we learn when we engage in design-based implementation research? And today I'm going to actually use a new term to describe the practice of design that I haven't used, and I'm taking the occasion of the talk to really work through some ways that I'm trying to locate design-based implementation research within the Scandinavian tradition of participatory design. And so I'm going to use this practice or term of infrastructuring as a way to characterize the nature of collaborative design inside of DBIR. And I'm going to define what I mean by that and how it's used, and maybe I'm misusing it for my purposes here, to talk about how we go about design locally here with our research practice partnership with the Denver Public Schools. And I want to try to characterize what I think we learned through our design efforts. In addition, these are my various Twitter handles at the bottom, and you will, if you follow me, you will notice there will be some ancillary resources popping up here and there to the talk. So I want to begin with a premise that I think many people who engage in design research share, which is that it aims for big transformations to current educational practice, not small ones. We seek not just to develop better tools to meet current goals or standards for student learning. Design studies, as Cobb and colleagues argue, are test beds for innovation in which the purpose is to investigate new possibilities for educational improvement by bringing about new forms of learning in order to study them. To the extent that these studies are successful, some argue, the practices we develop in our controlled settings become images that drive the reorganization of schooling in fundamental ways. A good example is the SimCalc MathWorlds program of research, begun more than 2 decades ago by the late Jim Catlett. SimCalc aimed to democratize access to the mathematics of change by bringing fundamental concepts about rates of change to middle schoolers. SimCalc software made its mathematics accessible through linked representations of phenomena familiar to everyday experience. And the materials developed by a team at SRI International integrated this software into a powerful intervention. It represents some of the best of what design research has to offer as an approach to developing and testing powerful interventions. In multiple trials of effectiveness in Texas, Florida, and the UK, SimCalc has proven effective in improving students' mathematical understandings. Another achievement, I think, in the policy realm of design research is embodied in this National Research Council volume, The Framework for K-12 Science Education. This consensus volume served as a blueprint for new standards in science education, The research drew heavily on design research focused on curriculum development that Kate McNeil, just named for, was involved in for its insights on student learning. The standards that were developed from that are intended to serve as an image to guide major reorganizations of science education in the U.S. Now, the reality is that neither the interventions like SimCalc nor standards per se can bring about systemic transformation or ensure equity within transformed systems. Just a year after research left the Texas schools where they conducted a study of SimCalc, half of the teachers were no longer using the SimCalc materials. It was, moreover, the case of the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer. Those students whose teachers were most likely to still be using the materials were in classrooms with students who were already high achieving in mathematics. New standards, moreover, mean nothing without the hard work of developing new materials, assessments, professional development to go with them, and the work of supporting implementation in ways that make sense to teachers. These things have to all fit together, together for that to work. None of these are easy tasks, and so we need approaches that both draw our attention to how fundamental these tasks are and how to help us develop an understanding of what it will take to create lasting and equitable change. This is the sort of question that DBIR asks, is how can we support the equitable transformation of educational systems through design research? And so this is the approach that, these are the 4 principles or key features of design-based implementation research. As its name implies, it is a blend of 2 different traditions of research. Design research, with its interventionist focus on trying to make changes to systems in order to understand them, but implementation research and policy programs, which typically aims to describe and explain the implementation of policies. So we try to take that interventionist approach of design research and meld it with a focus on implementation. It is a design approach, and I'm going to try to articulate what it is we design when we do DBIR. The 4 key features of DBIR shown on this slide are what define the approach. We say that all 4 have to be present because many projects share one or more of these features. What is distinctive is when they're used in conjunction with one another. The 4 principles or features that are the research effort is, one is that they're focused on problems of practice as negotiated by multiple stakeholders, which typically include educators, educational leaders, researchers, and sometimes young people and their families. The anchoring in practice is key here, as is the idea that the focal problem is something that is negotiated among the partners. It's not what either partner came to do when they first started working together. It's something that comes out of the negotiated process. Second, the commitment is to iterative collaborative design, in which the iterations are informed by what is found by testing designs in the crucible of practice. The what of design is different only insofar as in DBIR there's always, to some degree, designing across levels of a system. And the example I'll give today will illustrate exactly what I mean by that. Third, DBIR aims to produce knowledge and theory that others can use, both to guide practice in the classroom and to aid in supporting implementation of innovations intended for the classroom. And finally, DBIR aims to build a capacity of systems and partnerships like the one that I'm going to describe today to sustain the changes that they make. For me, and the way I interpret this last principle, it is the capacity of a partnership that has an ongoing relationship that is not bounded by time or by project necessarily, a commitment to building its capacity for continuous improvement. I'm going to focus mostly on these middle 2 principles today, although at the end you can ask me questions about any of them. Articulating specifically, because this is the design research center of the work, so both the design work and the knowledge that we produce from it. And to do so, I'm going to borrow a concept from participatory design that I have been finding especially generative as I've been reading in it, and that's the term infrastructure. To understand it, we need to actually go back a couple of decades to Lee Starr and Karen Roulader's definition of infrastructure. Infrastructure, as we normally think of it, is like railroads and highways and electrical grids. And that certainly is infrastructure, but what they also mean is it's something that we really depend on to engage in our everyday practices. They define it as a relational concept. It's when we can do something locally, such as teach a science class, that's afforded by some larger scale technology and materials, and in a way that feels transparent to us, ready to hand, natural. That which is the infrastructure, by definition, is something that fades into the background most of the time. For technology, or the things that we design, technology, I mean this very broadly, like curriculum materials, assessments, to become infrastructural, it has to get folded into organizational changes, become part of what Starr refers to elsewhere as a working infrastructure for the accomplishment of specific tasks. So what is infrastructure? This term was inspired by Bowker and Starr's chapter called How to Infrastructure in their, at the end of their book, Sorting Things Out, a wonderful read I can recommend about how classification schemes are materialized in various layered infrastructures of societies. Articulated by Elena Kavasti and Annalisa Shiranen, infrastructuring is about integrating new tools and technologies with existing networks of people, materials, and tools. The work involves negotiations and compromises along the way. These two scholars, as well as others who study infrastructuring, emphasize two features of infrastructuring. In it, for one, users are involved in the design, not just up front, but as they invent new uses in the field for tools and integrate them to pursue new possibilities for practice that hadn't been imagined up front by designers. There is an assumption that if technologies are to be made useful, practitioners must effectively take up the work of design, appropriating the technology so as to incorporate it into the material environment and the set of practice that they're engaged in. So there are two aspects that are called out in some of the contemporary Scandinavian writing that I will try to pull out in the work that we do locally. One is simply just to think about it as creating the various conditions for social innovation. So we can think of designers as creating conditions in which diverse actors can explore new possibilities and create more sustainable, equal, and just worlds, not just schools, that really affect the causes of social problems merely than relieving symptoms. This is the equity focus. This is that we're really about creating new possibilities, complete the organizations of the systems that we're after. Designers who may initially be outsiders to a system actually aim to become part of it somehow, cultivating long-term relationships with actors inside the system and building a network that designs together. Relationship building takes primacy in the work. Instead of following predefined plans, design teams often engage in patchwork efforts, focused on continuously matching different stakeholders and their respective agendas. When a match doesn't work, you try another. As Emerson argues, conflicting interests, values, and ways of working often threaten to cause projects to collapse. And you'll see some threats to our project that I share today. And at times, projects are closed down because the different actors don't match with each other as intended. This is not a reason for giving up. Instead, it's a reason to see the matching of people and the creation of constellations as a kind of prototyping process. If one match doesn't work, try another. This is the sort of collaborative engagement with the world of policies and the mess of schools that design-based implementation research embraces and says, no, that's not policy and implementation over there, it's design here. It's part of our work. It's claiming it as what we do. And part of that is and that centers around building the relationships and maintaining them. The second component is really around how do we actually go about redesigning infrastructures. And this really draws on Starr and Rulever's concept of a working infrastructure. We focus our design on creating a working infrastructure around a particular system or technology that's being designed, and it means making sure that it plugs into other infrastructures and tools in a standardized way. Designers aim to learn from and plan for how the organizational structures are going to influence the design and use of innovations, by making visible what's the existing infrastructures and the work that people do to maintain it. And it's key, though, even if you know what these things are, studying it in advance is not enough, because the work of maintaining infrastructures is continuous. If you work in any school district, you know how true this is. And not under the control, and it's also not under the control of any one actor, which is something that every design team has to wrestle with. So in this connection, transforming systems through infrastructure is both, I would say, a challenging and elusive aim, requiring teams to enroll other actors in endeavors to construct more equitable workplaces, communities, and educational systems. Design teams have to start someplace with some group of actors with the full knowledge that the work's going to require them to evolve the focus of their efforts and the teams that are engaged in the work. And I have the word "re" in here for a reason, which is that none of us walk into these systems as if they didn't exist before. So when we are engaging in infrastructure, and we are always redesigning infrastructures, not doing so from de novo. While infrastructuring is a way to characterize the nature of our collaborative design work and its focus, we need a little more refined set of theories that can help to guide our design decisions that we're seeking to test, refine, and elaborate. So I would say infrastructuring is kind of like a meta theory of design. In DDIR, there are always at least two layers of theory to engage. The first is layered and centered around a theory of how students learn. In our partnership that I'm going to describe here, we're guided by conceptions of disciplinary learning in science that are reflected in the research reported in a framework for K-12 science education. These ideas represent a synthesis of science learning drawn from a range of socio-cognitive and sociocultural perspectives on learning. They are transformative in the sense that the vision of the framework, if it were to be broadly implemented, would represent a major change to how teaching and learning is organized in U.S. schools today. The framework promotes a vision of equity in which all students are expected to meet demanding goals for science proficiency, and a vision of diversity that emphasizes the need to link instruction to students' everyday experiences and interests, so as to help them identify with science and engineering as cultural endeavors. The tools that we employ to facilitate design are intended to scaffold our joint attention to the vision of the framework and commitments to promoting equity and diversity in science education. And this is where we diverge, and I think what makes DDIR different is the second layer of theory, which is related to the organizational context in which designs are going to be implemented. These pertain to how it is that you can support teacher and leader learning. How do organizational routines support innovation in practice and stabilization of practice when you have practices that you want to keep? How do policies support teachers in implementing certain things? How do technology systems need to be supporting and augmenting the capacity of teachers to support learning and assess their students' learning? How can external partners in our case like us, help school districts to make changes, to add expertise to the system and support the ongoing work? Policy theories in particular really help us to think through these various issues. In our particular project, we've drawn concepts from institutional theory as developed within studies of local policymaking and education. Folks like Patricia Burge, Brian Rowan, and Jim Spillane are people who influence our thinking. Now, these policy theories both anticipate and elaborate on things like the ways that people organize, on how people organize these various topics. And I'll say in a minute, one of the most generative ones is this new idea that is coming out of the work by Jim Spillane and Megan Hopkins on something called instructional guidance infrastructure, which also goes back and traces some origins back to David Cohen's work. So policy theories like this, like instructional guidance infrastructure, suggest to us as designers where to look for potential sources of conflict and guidance to teachers. And they provide us a focus for our infrastructuring activities. They tell us what we might have to design for. American schools and districts, fortunately for us, and this is what makes this something that can travel beyond Denver public schools, they have a lot of similarities in terms of the components that make up the instructional guidance infrastructure. A district's infrastructure usually includes standards. There may be, in addition to state standards, we love local control in the US, we might have district level standards that apply in addition to state standards. There are curriculum frameworks and often curriculum materials. There are assessments, both the state assessments and often district interim assessments. And then all of these things are related to one another somehow, not always coherently. Increasingly in large school districts, the interim or benchmark assessments are used to provide feedback to central office curriculum staff on student performance. There are also pacing guides that tell teachers what to teach on what days. These components are increasingly significant sources of guidance to teachers and districts. And there's evidence that teachers use them to make decisions about what components of innovations to implement and how much time to devote to them. A more coherent infrastructure, and this is a conjecture, is one that's aligned to a particular vision for teaching, is one that I think can foster productive sense-making on the part of teachers to make decisions to implement, radically different innovations. This implies the need for a design team to attempt to have different components of infrastructures fit together, so that no matter where the focus of their design efforts might be, you may have to attend to these other elements that are going to affect implementation. These infrastructures, like every other infrastructure you will find in society, they're layered on top of each other. They were started at different times, and they're continuously evolving. So aligning design activities requires continuous activity with with often, in our case, different district units to make adjustments to our designs and where possible to other components of the infrastructure. The success demands a tremendous amount of adaptation to changing organizational environments. Now, one of the things that we'll note is that this concept is underdetermines what we should actually do. And hence, that's why we do, one of the reasons we do design research is to actually refine our theories. And so one of the aims that we have in our project is really to try to understand the district's instructional guidance infrastructure by trying to change it. And here's where we really differ from traditional policy research. Policy researchers don't try to understand things by changing them. They let other people change them. So this is our move as collaborative designers, to try to understand this infrastructure by pushing up against it. So I want to share a little bit about what we're learning about district infrastructures that might have, hopefully, implications for other projects elsewhere. And we want to understand, too, the limits of what we can do, because part of what infrastructures do is they resist. So I'm going to talk through the Inquiry Hub, which is which one can look at as a project. And part of this notion of infrastructure, and I'm learning from Scandinavia, is to don't look at things through these phases of projects. But we can describe, and we have to describe it to our funders as a project. It's a set of projects funded by the National Science Foundation and the Moore Foundation. And when I describe the project in this way, what we're really doing is developing digitally rich curriculum materials. In science, those materials are intended to be aligned to the next generation science standards. And the work that we're doing is focused on designing with teachers a new set of biology curriculum materials. And you may be disappointed, no, I'm really not going to talk about those materials today. I want to talk about all the stuff we have to do design-wise to make those materials usable in the context of our school district, because that's what's distinctive and what I think I can say is new here about what we're doing. But the other way to describe this is it's a long-term partnership between Denver Public Schools, UCAR, CU Boulder, and BSCS. And I'm so glad Jim Minstrel's in the room, because he was here for the beginning of my involvement in this partnership in 2007 for a project that we did well before I arrived in Denver. My colleague Tammy Sumner, who's not here but is in the CS department here, in parallel was working on a digital platform for curriculum with the school district. When I moved here, we joined forces and had another project funded by the NSF to continue this work. And we are continuing to, and lucky for me, Tammy worked in a participatory design way, so it was a really easy partnership to actually sort of combine. And we've been working with some of the same folks over multiple projects now since 2007. And so really I like to describe this as a partnership. And the other way I think I want to sort of emphasize in terms of what DBIR is it's an approach to use inside a research practice partnership. You can't really do DBIR as a project. It really is something that happens inside partnerships. And I can say more later about why I think that is. So we are organized in our design work in terms of, this is the most I'll say about our curriculum, is we have multiple design teams, each of which is comprised of a researcher with expertise in science education and or assessment, in science ed, and curriculum, as well as classroom teachers, and also district leaders. So we have district leaders who are part. We are using a tool by Brian Reiser from Northwestern University called the Storyline tool to anchor the development and design of our units. And we have external partners who provide both feedback to us on these units, who are scientists, and also we have Denver Parks and Recreation as a full partner in our work on ecosystems, which is one of our units. Students, as part of our core unit, actually get to pick out a tree to plant in their schoolyard that will maximize benefits to the environment and also to biodiversity in the urban tree canopy of Denver. That's our big design that we're working on. So we have partners who are relevant, bringing in relevant expertise to that. What is it that we're doing? What is all the work that kind of makes it possible for us that we feel is really important that we do? And one of the things that we started was, we started out thinking, my goodness, how are we going to start working with a group of teachers who, the framework for K-12 science education was published in 2011. A lot of states started adopting the new standards in 2013. So there's really zero conversation in Colorado about adopting these standards. But the school district wanted to move forward with them. And so we're thinking, how are we going to build the capacity of a group of teachers with very little engagement with the ideas of this framework? We're going to have to spend a lot of time actually getting our district and teachers involved in that. Fortunately for us, at the same time, the district secondary science coordinator discovered online, my colleagues work at the Next Generation Exemplar System, which is a kind of a hybrid model of professional development. It's really face-to-face, but it involves teachers getting together and watching video, engaging with discussions of videos around inquiry into really understanding the vision of science learning that is represented in the framework. So this secondary science coordinator was about to convene a whole group of teachers to study on his own when he discovered this. And he asked me, he said, well, do you know these people? So this is one of those acts of brokering that I think is fundamental to relationship building. I said, yes, I know these people. I set up a time to meet. We had a conference call. And one of the things that was really hard to negotiate is that my colleagues had a very specific implementation model that in no way would ever work in Denver public schools in terms of the number of hours and how they needed to be distributed. So one of the roles of the partner here is to help both sides see, like, yeah, Denver really wants to do this right, but they can't do it the way you need them to. So part of our infrastructuring effort is we took complete diversion. We spent some time and we put together a proposal for a grad student to study this. We worked on brokering this connection to build this capacity, partly because our partner wanted it, and because it would act. But the second reason is we actually thought we would benefit from this, especially if there were a lot of teachers who participated who would overlap. And lo and behold, we had 5 or 6 biology teachers, and we knew we were going to design biology, who signed up. How many finished? 1. Right, so part of the realities too, this is the limits of the network, is as districts change, one of the things that happens in larger urban school districts is that the science teachers move around from year to year. You make very big investments, at least in our country, in professional development and building the capacity of teachers. But if you don't worry about this thing about whether teachers are moving assignments from year to year, then all of a sudden, your investments, they didn't help us in this case. We were grateful to have the one teacher that continued with us with the design, but one of the things we had to do is build back into we had a 5-day design workshop, build in a whole lot of opportunities to learn about the framework. So this is, lesson number 1 about infrastructure, and is a little bit about, I mentioned it because there's the emergence of new concerns in the district, as well as new opportunities. The opportunity to kind of engage in a diversion that might actually help you, but also the disappointment that it doesn't quite work out the way you had hoped. And I think this is we learn from our failures, and this is one that's like a partial success, I would say. And it really helped to build our relationships and create some conditions for innovation. The second thing we have to worry about, and this is, I think, very general issue with human services professions that David Cohen writes eloquently about, that in all human services professions, especially teaching, professionals depend heavily on the constructive engagement of their clients, in our case, students, for success. When we ask professionals to try out new practices, the risk of failure is heightened because it's not easy to anticipate how clients will respond to the changed game. So when heightened risk is coupled with heightened accountability, there's really little room for failure without consequences. And so without consequences, and this stifles innovation. So we had to work to figure out, is there a role we can play as external partners in creating some conditions for safety? So we do this in several ways. One of the people who was visiting here from California who's watched us at NRPD said, I really like this first thing, I'll tell you that, I should notice it. So we have something that is in every meeting that we come back to, and it matters that we come back to, it's called the parking lot. And districts can raise issues with, so the district, in our meetings, the district is there as well as the teachers. So the teachers don't always feel safe saying everything. They mostly feel safe because we felt that, and we've created those conditions. But we always provide a place for the teachers to come back and say, look, I'm really worried about these assessments, or my principal's coming in tomorrow, this technology isn't working, how can you help me with this? And we have somebody who reviews these in every meeting. And that's a ritual and routine. And the way it builds safety is that we follow up. If we didn't follow up on it, things just stayed in the parking lot, nothing would happen. But this is a routine that we build in to try to create some safety. The other thing is that there's something here that a lot of Denver principals have become enamored of that is done by a charter school called Common Schools. A guy by the name of Doug Lamar has a series. And he has all these I'll call them behavioristic rituals for classroom management that are very popular with Denver principals. So all of our teachers all of a sudden had to do something called a do now, which is one of his techniques. So, something for the students to do to increase the efficiency of the classroom. Lamont is all about efficiency. So what do? Like we have all these lesson design templates we're working on. We adjusted our own template, right? So this isn't something if you were just publishing a curriculum you would do. But if we want usable curriculum that's usable in a range of schools in this district, we have to make sure that the start of every lesson is a do now. It's called that. So this is the way that we have to adjust, and this is how we figure out, like, how can we do this in a principled way? So we think about, we have these commitments to engaging kids with thinking about a science phenomenon. So our do-nows will always be having to wrestle with some kind of phenomenon that then will get picked up and explained and accounted for through the day's lessons. So I don't think we've compromised in any way, but we've definitely adjusted our designs to adapt to the local context. Part of we do this too is it's really important that we under-design. So Gerhard Fischer, who's on faculty here, talks a lot about this. If you over-design, that you don't let the user actually figure out how to vocally adapt. When we have our weekly PD sessions, it's like I listen for this. For some teachers, we don't provide enough content. For others, we provide too much. And we must have hit it just right because we've got a really good mix. And part of it is that we try to be more skeletal in actually what we provide when we can. And finally, one of the things that's a really big challenge here in districts today across the country is that we have these observational systems where principals and often non-subject matter experts come in and they evaluate teachers on their teaching using a particular instructional framework. And we've tried to create, this is one of the places it's in red because we can't figure out how to influence the system. Basically, these are a number of observers. There's only 2 science observers in all of the school district in Denver. They have to go into every classroom. And the risk here is like we don't actually know if our materials work the first time. So something could really bomb and we then put a teacher at risk. So what we have done is actually, we have a kind of SWAT team of district leaders who come in when there is somebody who's been observed and it's gone awry. And we triage, we try to figure out what's the problem, and we make it clear that somebody in the district curriculum is supporting this teacher. And then we also provide a crosswalk tool between the framework for K-12 science education, what should somebody be seeing, and the framework that's used in the district to evaluate teaching. That's a design artifact that we created in order to make it, and we give that to not to the actual observer, but to the teachers in our study to hand to the observer if they need it. But we can't seem to prevent the sort of a bad evaluation event from happening. Because again, members of our networks are actually not part of the system of evaluation as part of that. So it's one of the limitations of our network. So taken together, what do we learn from these two sets of efforts? One is that we can work very carefully to support trust building between district leaders and teachers by surfacing and addressing concerns. And it's the surfacing and addressing that's really important. Surfacing is not enough. We also try to create some materials that can be easily adapted by teachers, and that's something that's really necessary for networks. But also we have to appreciate that many infrastructural components cannot be modified. The networks must, they have to bend to designs. We have to adjust to the designs, conform to them, or under-design in order to enable implementation. This is the reason a lot of people just they throw up their hands. This is the moment they say, oh, why are you even trying this? This is too hard. But I think what we're learning is by pushing against these things, we can actually learn what we can and can't redesign. And it's not nothing. There's some of the stuff that you can influence. And the next set of patchwork efforts I will talk about here are just that. This term, patchwork efforts, comes from the folks that have been citing Emerson and others and Pelion. And it's such a nice term for how we try to put patchwork together to make our designs seaworthy and float in the real world. And I want to highlight three. We call them patchwork because they don't entail major shifts to either our designs or to the infrastructures that we're trying to influence, but rather small ones we make in response to perceived threats to the success of our design initiatives. They're a distinctive feature, too, I think, of DBIR, insofar as they focus principally on issues that emerge in implementation and are directly responsive to those issues. Developing accounts of these efforts is important, just as it's important in classroom-based design research, in order to describe the iterations and warrant them. So they help build our understanding, specifically of the conditions required in real districts to implement innovations. That is to realize this third key feature or principle of DBIR, that what we're about is developing theory and knowledge related to both classroom learning and implementation. Although researchers can initiate some of these patchwork efforts, I think the ability of a team to engage in such efforts really depends on the skill and the authority of the educators with whom researchers are partnered, or designers are partnered. As we elaborate here, the patchwork efforts that we have undertaken in the Inquiry Hub have all been initiated or mostly carried out by district leaders and teachers. Although we have lent our expertise to this process and we've been very much involved in the problem solving around it in some ways as consultants to that. So early in our design process, we decided to begin this development of a new biology curriculum and have it be a project-based unit. And Janet Carlson, who's not here, was part of that initial work. There she is. Hey, welcome. You weren't here earlier. So Janet has been part of our partnership. So Janet, we said we're going to start a new biology system and start in the year in ecosystems. And ecosystem standards, if you look at the next generation science standards, make up 8 out of 24 of the life sciences standards. So it's actually quite a big chunk of the content. And although that proportion is not intended in the standards to indicate how much time that they'll devote, our network really realized that we would need to require significant time. We settled on 8 weeks as a target length for the unit, with the idea that the other 3 disciplinary core ideas related to cellular structures and processes, evolution and heredity, would each require their own 8-week units. We also agreed that it would be the first in the biology curriculum. And it would move, that basically the year would move from a macro perspective in biology to a micro perspective. Now, the district science coordinator had to make a lot of adjustments, though, to the district pacing guide to create space in the school year for this new unit. The existing pacing guide was developed with the district's current adopted textbook, which was another BSCS biology textbook, in mind. And in that book, a much smaller proportion of content, or at least as district represented, was devoted to ecosystem days, well short for only 10 instructional days out of the 40 that we planned. In addition, the district didn't wish to require all teachers that adopt the next developed and not yet developed or tested materials. So the pacing guide had to be adjusted to reflect 2 different tracks for teachers. The other thing is that ecosystems came at the end. So if we wanted our system to have in the prayer of survival, we had to work with the district science coordinator to adjust this pacing guide. So he created a special pacing guide for the pilot teachers so that the teachers could begin teaching the unit at the earliest date that teachers indicated they might start in the spring. Teachers, for their part, found some time after testing to try to extend the unit. Although these adjustments helped, as we fleshed out the lessons for the unit, our initial draft included more than 40 days of instruction, as often happens. Any of you who've done curriculum design realize you end up over-designing even more than that. We pared down some things that proved insufficient. So in our first pilot, many people ran out of time to finish that. We're now in our second pilot, which is going on right now. We made additional adjustments to the spacing guide and also made some significant revisions to the unit. And this is all, again, we're deeply involved in helping think about this pacing guide for the district. And it's because we're involved with district leaders that we're able to actually help influence this level of infrastructure. When we learned about the number of items that were devoted to ecosystems in the district engineering assessment, something that the teachers raised in the parking lot, it was very few. I asked to see the actual assessment items from the previous year's test. Most of them were multiple choice with a few constructive response tasks and one extended performance task that required students to evaluate conditions for human survival inside a fictitious Martian science lab. Nearly all of the items elicited students' ability to recall facts, and only a few demanded that students construct explanations of scientific phenomena or even analyze patterns in complex data sets. As the teachers suspected too, there were very few items related to our content. So to the extent that teachers orient to these interim tests and wanted their kids to do well, this put us at tremendous risk if we didn't intervene and do something. So the schedule for writing items, so many districts in the US have teams of teachers who write these items. So there was a workshop going on to write these items at the same time our design workshop was going on. So we could not have overlap in the teams. So that ended up falling to me as someone who said, uh-oh, we better do this really quick. And so we did a very quick job of coming up with a handful of performance tasks, which from, when I have my assessment design headset on, I'm like, this is not adequate assessment work. But it's survival work, so this is patchwork. This is what you do to keep your design afloat. And so then teachers can say to you, like, yeah, I can teach this unit and develop this time because there's items that my kids are going to do well on. They're challenging, they meet, and also, importantly to us, they align the division of learning in a framework better. They actually demanded much more of students in terms of their ability to construct explanations and develop and use models to understand phenomena. So this is another patchwork effort. The last one I'll say is something that we really realized was a contradiction in the way that we were operating, and it's more the infrastructure of the partnership. So the framework really takes seriously this idea that we should connect to students' interests and experiences. And the way that we figured out our anchoring and driving question for our project in the first year was to guess. We thought kids would be interested in figuring out what kind of tree to plant in their schoolyard. Turned out we guessed mostly right. Like when the first day of class comes, the kids are amazed at planting trees. We did, however, engage in a lot of measurement work that told us that there was a lot of variability in the unit lessons with respect to how focused they were on this overarching challenge. Kids were not always excited. They were bored plenty in the context of our unit. We collected data weekly from classrooms, from students to figure this out. So we said, we have to do something about this. We have to actually get some input from some group of students about what our driving questions are. So we actually engaged an intern through our research practice collaboratory, who's a policy student here at CU, Wajma Nandi, and had her design, we actually brainstormed a list of potential questions and anchoring phenomena for an evolution unit. And then we actually gave a survey to kids about which ones of these questions interest you enough to spend 4 to 5 weeks on. And we used that as one source of input for selecting what it was just one source. But it was a really important one, and as we designed our first iteration of that unit, people came back to this evidence from the students. They came back to that evidence that we have to keep this challenge focal. because the students are telling us. And so this is where we really try to, it's not a full degree of student agency in the design process, let me be clear. There are people who do that way better than I do on my design teams. But it is a way to get the student voice into our design process in a way that can inform it in ways that I think we were feeling like we were being somewhat contradictory. Superbugs, by the way, the idea that antibiotic resistance might eventually kill us all as humans was the winner of the topic. So we have an anchoring unit on antibiotic resistance that we're in the middle of developing. So what have we learned from these things? One is, if you don't know already, in American school districts, infrastructural components change rapidly. And design networks, what that means for designers is that you have to be nimble. You can't go through, your regular processes of design and assessment development in order to be responsive in a way that actually helps you survive. So that's a tension for those of us who have strong commitments to research rigor, and I do. But I'm willing to do this work. I think it's really important. Time and expertise need to align, and some of that work can come from outside the system. The authority to change infrastructures lives within districts and our educational systems. But the expertise and the time sometimes comes from outside, and inside a partnership you can really leverage that. Incorporating student voice can actually enhance our direct connections to the student interests we found. And then I think one of the things that we've found is really that because the components move fast, you're going to always miss some opportunities. You can't work as fast if you are outside these school systems as the system is changing. And so part of the limits of the network, what are the limits of design, is to really just know that, and kind of, there are moments that you have to be strategic about where you're going to engage in this patchwork efforts. So what have we contributed, or what might we contribute to theory in this work? What do we learn when we push on infrastructure? So going back to Danny's question, what do we learn when we infrastructure? What do we learn when we design? That we might not learn also from descriptive study. So one is the way that the certain components push back against our efforts, and they circumscribe how much influence we can have over the system to create good conditions for social innovation. I'd argue we might have known this principle ahead of time, or by observing practitioners working in isolation to change the infrastructures around them. But the resistance we uncovered here manifests in such things as the requirement for teachers to have a warm-up activity, or do now when they enter the classroom, may not always be visible to the external observer if there's no pushback at all. Infrastructure, by its very nature, is transparent until it breaks down. Our design activities push on some elements until we can see them partially break and then become objects with which we can wrestle. With respect to the ideas about infrastructure and we're appropriating for our purposes from the participatory design field, I think we're engaged more here in the idea of theory elaboration activity. What does this look like in the context that's very different from community-based design efforts, say in Sweden, when we're doing this in American school systems? Who are the key actors? What are the particular layers of infrastructure and standards we're working with? And what are the demands on that infrastructures make of practice? And then identifying the specific system components. These are the things I think that we're elaborating on and hopefully building on theory. Challenges is that, probably some of you who do design work in the US recognize a lot of these challenges. And part of it is this is really hard work. We need more capacity to do this work. There are two areas, too, that I think are really critical. What's all of the upfront work to figure out what the heck you're going to work on together? So we worked for many months to figure out what is it that we need to most do. And then there's these patchwork efforts emerge and you have to decide on the fly what you want to do. But this issue of what is the problem we're working on and how do I negotiate that? To sit at the intersection of what will add to knowledge, but also be responsive to our partners. That's the game of DBIR. And it's a very hard thing to find because there are many things that will contribute to knowledge that our colleagues in research are interested in that will not contribute to practice. And there are many things we could work on that are problems of practice that won't add knowledge. So figuring out that place is really challenging. The other thing that I find very challenging for most designers is to engage with implementation theory. It's not something that people are familiar with. It's also not typically used to design. So this move of DBIR is a new move to try to say, how can we use work on like things like instructional guidance infrastructures, to do real design work, to do real work, as Andy Sessa and Paul Cobb call us, because where theories need to tell us, give us some clues as to what work we need to do. For district leaders, there are also issues. How do I figure out which of the people, like in this room, who approach me that I should trust, who are going to be in it for the long haul with me? That's hard to do, I think. You know, one clue that one person told me they use is I bring the researcher in, and if they talk for 15 minutes, which I've done here today, and at the meeting that's supposed to be a dialogue, they're never coming back. So they're very simple heuristics. So part of it is figuring out, but training people and preparing people who should you trust from our community is a really hard thing. And then also really building a system, seeing the system, and also having this commitment to improvement that's grounded in research. That's not how districts operate in the U.S. They see something they like, and want to bring it to scale down. And that isn't actually conducive to actually bringing it to scale to in a way that actually will support things. And part of it is learning how, as Tony Wright and colleagues say, to see the system, to see how these local actions that I'm doing over here in the curriculum department affect everything else. I want to close with a couple of efforts that I'm involved in to try to build these kinds of capacities. I mentioned to you an NSF-funded project called the Research Practice Collaboratory. Michelle Choi is here from the Collaboratory from the Exploratorium, which is the lead agency. My colleagues are involved from EDC, from the University of Washington, here in Colorado, and also our evaluation team at SRI International Advanced Research. And one of the things that we're doing is these are three different partnerships that are all engaged in design-based implementation research work. And their work appears in some of the work that they're doing in design work in three different kinds of partnerships. The one led by the Exploratorium is comprised of mostly out-of-school organizations doing making and tinkering work. The one at EDC is a rural partnership of multiple districts looking at how iPads can support interactive mathematics learning. And the one at the University of Washington is focused, like our work here in iHub, on curriculum adaptation to learn in GSS. The work we do here is work to actually build capacity in the field, to help build a network of research practice partnerships who are capable of, if they want, of engaging in our research practice network is our website. And with that, I'll close by inviting people to one of the things we're doing as part of our Boulder work is to actually have something so those of you who are in Europe can tune in. You don't have to tune in live. It's in the late afternoon here. But we're going to have a series of 6 different sessions that are going to be recorded and available on YouTube called the Research Practice Forum. And our first topic is on getting a partnership started. So we're bringing together people from around most of the U.S. Welcome additional voices from Europe since there are a lot here to engage in this discussion because I know that you all are wonderful partners and partnership work. With that, we'll close, and I didn't need a whole lot of time for questions, but there are a
couple minutes for questions.
Trying to catch us a little bit up.
Any questions?
I wonder if you can make a couple of comments about how you've had conversations about the issues of responsibility and accountability. Well, you talk about design teams, social networking, creating networks, and so on. I'm assuming that a lot of those conversations, negotiations had to be about who's responsible for what, who's accountable for what.
Yeah.
How do you talk about some of those?
Yeah, so we sometimes call our partnership two-tiered because we have a design team that includes everyone, and then there's a leadership tier that includes our partners on the research side, which are the different organizations, ESCS, UCARS, and then DPS. And so we meet with these guys that team meets once a week, roughly, and that's where the roles and accountabilities get defined. We do a kind of meta design activity between years too, like with each other, like, okay, this was really hard, we just designed it with human, and it was like, we were designing until the spring, how can we do it differently? That's the sort of thing that happens on an annual basis where we really think a lot about our design process explicitly, and that's where we articulate those roles and responsibilities. Does that answer the question?
One more question.
Yes. There are partnerships working in New York and LA, and then, I know San Francisco is represented in the room. San Francisco is more Denver size. I would say that the size of the partnership has to fit the scope of the work. We are too small, because one of the things that is not one of the groups that is not part of our work are all the supervisors and principals. We are kind of siphoned off to curriculum and instruction, which is not a central part of the district central office, if you will. It's a peripheral part of the district. That's why we have to bend to the do-nows, right? So what's driving reform are principals and their supervisors. So we're actually too small. So I would say to answer that question is, the right size is what you want, based on what you want to do. Can I ask Jim Minstrel's question? Yeah, and then,
You mentioned that it's important to under-design.
yes.
And yet, we see teachers who say, I need more detail. What is it that you're supposed to do with this? Teachers who say, it's fine.
Yeah. How do you balance that? Yeah. Well, part of it is using the implementation to elaborate what is not there, and actually trying to we set up our teachers to be resources for one another in the implementation. So each week we have a Zoom meeting, a video conference meeting, where all the teachers, they're in there. And we actually go mostly in reverse order of who's farthest along in our unit. And they talk about what's going well, what's not going well. And we try to really empower them to be resources to each other. And that really helps with that conversation a lot, because then they can hear that for some of their colleagues it isn't enough. It empowers them to then take the ownership of, if it's not enough for me, I gotta make it happen. Phil?
Thank you, Bill.